what is paint and what is canvas and what is a piece of stone and what is a piece of anything particularly. It's all pretty ordinary. It's the concentration of a certain kind of energy that makes it extraordinary. So maybe one's saying art is about transformation. Art is the process of transformation. I was born in Bombay in 1954, and we lived, my father was in the Navy, which was, I think, probably very, of course, very important in our lives, not only at the time, but I think all the way through. We then, well, he was transferred to Dehradun in, I think, 1966, whereupon my brother and I went to the Doon School. A combination of being rather cranky and being boisterous. I mean, at Doon School, I think I was probably the only boy in my year not to be made a prefect or a monitor. But somehow or the other, it was just not me, just not what I wanted to do. The idea that a boy from a professional family might become an artist was unheard of, at least in the circles in which my parents mixed. So that kind of will to fiddle around with things and make whether it's images or make little put things together or whatever, was always seen as, you know, I'm going to be an engineer, of course. My brother and I were actually in the same year, my younger brother and I. When we left school and went to university, we went to university in Israel in the beginning. I mean, this is sort of in 1970 or 71. We, of course, both went to engineering college, and I stayed there for 6 months and realized it was not what I wanted to do. And then I had to somehow break the news that decided I was going to be an artist, which I think was a pretty difficult blow for my parents. But they did support me to go to art school, which was very good of them, in spite of their misgivings. I decided then to go to art school in Britain, and it's a strange decision because I have no idea why I made that decision. I can't really remember the moment at which the decision was made. But maybe these big things in life, they sort of happen to you. You don't decide them. The moment I came to art school, my world changed. I felt as if maybe for the first time in my life I could concentrate. Maybe I felt as if, you know, there was something I really, truly, deeply wanted to do. And I think in some senses, the change I think it resulted in some kind of change in my personality, but it was pretty marked. I felt as if I had a real purpose. I knew exactly what I was going to do. That determination has sort of stayed with me all the way through, really. I mean, at least for the last, whatever it is, 15, 17, whatever years that I've been working as an artist. And I think that I was just very lucky, I think, to suddenly, in some way, to find what it is that is my calling. I don't have a message to give you or anyone else about the state of things in the world. Artists really don't have anything to say. The artists we don't have, I mean, you know, politicians have things to say, and perhaps novelists have things to say, but poets and artists don't have things to say. But let's get the stuff right first. good drawing perhaps is not, to my mind then, is not something that's well crafted, but it's something that's well in its spirit. It might be to do with well-meaning or well-being. You know, one might say this is true of Buddhism or true of Jainism, I think, as well, that there is a deep consciousness of the very kind of essence of being in all things, in all objects, in all beings, in all aspects of the universe. I think being an artist is about learning to be in touch with that in some way or the other. So it's not about skill. I saw something in the V&A, Victoria and Albert Museum in London, which was a small Japanese object made out of a gourd, and I thought it was just the most wonderful, fascinating little object. The idea that one could grow a form, not make a form, but grow a form. And it's to do with the way that they're hung, and it's quite extraordinary that, you know, what is basically the same species of plant grows in so many different shapes. What I've been interested in them for is the fact that they're hollow. And of course I've been excavating the interior of all kinds of things for a long time. Yes, here it seems there's a pre-existing void. There's a pre-existing interior. A beautifully made object isn't the point. It's almost as if one would prefer, I think I would prefer, a badly made object that still manages somehow to convey that sense of deeper meaning. Being an artist is not about inspiration. It's not about those kind of wonderful flights of fantasy that are perhaps, you know, they're a small part of it. Most of it's just being in the studio, working away, trying this out and trying that out, getting it wrong. It's to do with application, time, of course thinking, and of course there's a certain kind of poetic time, but mostly it's being there and doing it. It's a kind of practice. I knew pretty early on that I was going to be a sculptor. That although the two-dimensional world somehow attracted me, there's something about the reality of the three-dimensional world and the possibility of a kind of unreality, which is something I come to in my work sort of later on. I must say I felt attracted by that. I mean, one doesn't make intellectual decisions about these things. I think they're things that one intuits, and they're just there. sculpture relates to the body in a very particular way. There's a way in which a form can be, so to speak, beyond words. A form can be a form and appeals in some very kind of visceral way. And what I've tried to do, or perhaps what's happened in the process of working with stone, is that I've sort of been drawn to the possibility that this very physical material can be non-physical, can have a kind of immateriality. It's hardly possible to make the immaterial without its relation to the physical.
I think that over the past 10 years, Anish has occupied a rather distinctive position both in Britain and internationally. I think that when his work was first seen here in the early 1980s, it seemed perhaps extremely exotic, unusual and strange. And I think at that time it was not really quite apparent to everyone how he was absorbing some of the Western traditions and 20th century traditions in art and bringing them together with material which he had really absorbed from his childhood.
I like, working with things this big, and when the opportunity presents itself, working on things which are pretty enormous. This is being built now, and I think actually just finished in Toronto. So it's, I'd say, the size of a reasonable domestic house. As an image in the middle of a kind of urban conglomeration, a mountain seems very odd because of the scale of it. It's so big that it's been cut by computer. I'm really not in a sense that interested in the technology, but in this instance it's very convenient. The latest body of work is even less physical. They're made of wood, they're made incredibly perfectly, and they're white. And I think what happens to them is that they come to be as if light solidified in a certain way. Maybe it's the opposite. Maybe it's the opposite of what I've been doing over a few years. I've been, many of the stoneworks are really excavated darkness. They're sort of a space full of emptiness or full of darkness or whatever. After a while, after having been in this country for about 5 years or so, I began to feel that if I was really going to do something as an artist, I had to reach some part of myself that was something else. And of course, the most important place for me to go in those terms was to my Indianness, to my origins, which I've always felt very strongly. I mean, in a way, it was a kind of revelation, I suppose, that it was just a kind of coming home. It was just a sense of freshness. And I think it showed immediately in the work that I made when I came back. I started working with pigment. It's a very physical stuff, but at the same time, it's dust. In a way, it's nothing. putting pigment on something in that particular way sort of removes the hand. It removes the way that it's made. It becomes a sort of ritual act. Well, my mother comes from the Jewish Iraqi community that once lived in Bombay. My father's from Punjab. So we had these kind of complicated double cultural influences. In my life, it's been a very, very important thing, you know, to be hybrid, to be truly kind of divided between one thing and another, to be even here, culturally part of this and part of that, and, sort of supposedly a British artist, but not really, supposedly an Indian artist, but not really.
Anish is probably, to my mind anyway, the first artist from a non-Western country to have understood both his ethnic origins, his background, his cultural background, and to have understood the history of modernism very clearly from a Western point of view. And unlike many artists who come into this Western culture situation, he has quite uniquely been able to bring the two together without there being any feeling or sense that there is some kind of disjunctive mixture of cultures.
Every time somebody writes about my work, to this day, one of the things that gets mentioned, first of all, is artist of Indian origin who makes equate this with this goddess or that god or that bit of Indian whatever, and I find this completely offensive. So one has to just fight that battle all the time and insist that what's being looked at is being looked at because of its energy, because of its reality in the world or whatever it is, and not because it's Indian or not Indian or exotic, because we can't any longer accept the idea that there's a central culture and that we're all sort of on the fringe of it. We are it. We are the central culture. There is no fringe. It's all hybrid. It's on one level, one might say that that purity is a kind of vulgarity. It's the mess of mixture that makes for creative energy and family life's always been very, at least in my head, very important to me. Getting round to it has taken a long time. I mean, I've lived more or less on my own for the last, whatever it is, 20 years. Because my parents live in Canada, and I have two brothers who also live in Canada. Susanna's from Germany, and we've been together for about nearly 5 years. And we've only recently had a baby. I look forward to the day when my daughter can be here, or I look forward here, meaning in the studio, which I think will be quite fun. What I expect is just a simple